Happy Samhain, everybody. It is Sunday, 10:30 at night, October 30th, 2011, and I haven't done a Samhain video yet. I did one 2 years ago, but I wanted to do a more updated, in-depth version, more research, more historical research, as opposed to just like pagan Samhain poems and rituals. So, I would like to share with everybody tonight the history behind our Halloween. So looking at our secular Halloween, which means the non-religious, our basic like holiday of Halloween, which is tomorrow. Looking at the traditions and customs we have here in America, because America is Halloween's biggest fan. Yeah, so I wanted to look at our American traditions, basically, looking at the history of that, going back into Ireland and other parts of Europe, and basically sharing with you from the beginning to currently our history of Halloween, so that maybe we can get more people to understand why pagans still celebrate it, why it's still a major holiday for pagans. It's Halloween for the secular, population. It's Samhain for the pagan population. And here's the history of Halloween, basically. So, a disclaimer. What we know of the Celts comes from secondhand sources, as well as educated guesses. This is because the Celts did not actually write anything down. It was more oral traditions with the Celts. For example, some of what we know is information we get from the Romans, who conquered the Celts in the first few centuries CE, or AD, whatever you like. We should take into consideration that some of what the Romans are probably saying about the Celts, like if you got a Roman writing about the Celtic ritual sacrifices, they're gonna be exaggerated. Why would people conquering other people want to exaggerate their lifestyle? They have to demonize them, obviously. So we can say that some of what, especially what the Romans are writing, is probably grossly exaggerated Roman propaganda to make the Celts look terrible. Okay, so Samhain. It looks like Samhain. This is probably the first thing any pagan learns about the holiday. Samhain. It looks like Samhain. Is pronounced Samhain. It's the Celtic word. How I like to tell people is take the M, flip it upside down to a W. It looks like Samhain. Samhain. It dates back 3,000 years to the Celtic lands. So the Celtic lands was not just Ireland. It was Ireland, all of the British Isles, France, other parts of Europe. Now the Celts were agricultural tribes. And as far as I know, Celtic doesn't really mean... I think basically Celtic is a language. So the Celts were defined by their language. As far as I know, I would Google that. Their lives and spirituality revolved around nature and the seasonal changes, much like pagans today. Pagans are very nature-oriented people with earth-based spiritualities. So, the Celts, because their lives revolved around nature and the seasonal changes, they were very dependent on the earth for food and for shelter. Basically, they relied on natural resources for everything. They relied on it for their very survival, which is something that we kind of take for granted today in the 21st century age of technology, So today, pagans celebrate some of these days that they celebrated. Like, we've got 8 holidays that we celebrate now. So you've got Yule, which is Christmas, December 21st. Then you get Imbolc, which is February 2nd. Ostara, which is March 21st. You've got the summer solstice, or Letha, June 21st. You've got Lunasa, which is August 2nd. And you've got Mabon, September 21st. And then you've got Samhain, which is tomorrow, October 31st. I think that's all late. I'm sorry if I've missed one. So, pagans celebrate some of these days as holidays. They weren't holidays for the Celts. They were just special days, like harvest days or just festivals. They weren't like holy days, as far as we know, I guess. So, Spring Festival, Fertility Festival was Beltane. Summer Solstice, Late Summer Harvest Festival was Lunasa. By the end of October, now keep in mind that the Celtic lands of, northwestern Europe. Now, here I am in Massachusetts. Uh, it snowed here yesterday. We have 6 inches of snow on the ground. It's frigid outside, and it's still October. Now, the Celtic lands are much further north. They're on a different latitude line, much further north. So even though, it's still temperate climate, the climate is much different. It's very cold, as you can imagine. So by the time they got to October, it was basically their winter was starting. So Samhain kind of marks the last harvest as well as the beginning of the cold, dark winter. Now, winter was a very stressful time for the Celts. The nights are longer and longer, and they were getting colder and colder. What you harvested in October had to last you all winter. And in Massachusetts, our winters are like 5 months long. So, if you have a whole tribe or a whole village, and what you harvest, if you had a bad harvest, that could have been it for you. So your harvest had to last you the entire winter. A good harvest meant the difference between life and death. You had to be able to keep yourself warm, keep yourself fed, keep yourself healthy. So because of this uncertain time of year, death became a relevant theme. Halloween was originally called Samhain, which is the Celtic word for end of summer. It was believed that at this time, the boundaries between our world of the living and the afterlife, or the world of the dead, was at its thinnest. This meant spirits of the dead could pass through to our world, and we could communicate with the dead. Not every spirit, however. They expected relatives to come back, people who had died in the past year. This was like a welcome thing. The dead are coming back. However, not every spirit was welcome or friendly. This was the belief. To appease the potentially evil spirits coming through, the Celts would leave offerings of food. By leaving these offerings, the Celts would ensure that the evil spirits would not trick them or haunt them. Sound a little familiar? So, this leaving of offerings, I've seen sources where this is the beginning of how we kind of got trick-or-treating, but it's not the best. So another way the Celts could hide themselves from potentially harmful spirits was to disguise themselves or dress up in costumes. Again, sounds familiar, right? So to hide themselves from the spirits they didn't want to be recognized by, they would disguise themselves. Animal fur, so they would be unrecognizable. So it needs to be clarified that the Celtic peoples did not conjure evil spirits. And this kind of gets muddled up. They did not conjure evil spirits. Nor were all of the spirits passing through evil. You gotta remember that Samhain was the day to honor the dead. The dead were coming back. Evil spirits could slip through, but they did not want anything to do with them. I think that needs to be remembered. Everybody's thinking that they're conjuring up the evil spirits, or they're like, come, we're gonna do evil things. And no. Good God, no. So the bulk of these mingling spirits were the souls of the ancestors, family and friends. It should also be reaffirmed, that Samhain was not a dark lord or a Celtic god. Samhain is not a person. Think about it. Samhain, Lord End of Summer. Samhain is not a figure that the Celts sacrificed humans and animals to or cast evil spells for. The idea of Samhain as a dark god was created in the 1700s. Has nothing to do with the Celts. It was made up by Colonel Valency, who was trying to prove that the Irish came from Armenia. So this is before accurate translations of the Celtic languages. So now that we know how to accurately translate them, please forget what you know as Samhain as a lord. He was not a lord. So the common belief today is that Samhain is a god that pagans still to this day worship. And it's just one of the many misconceptions we are trying to get rid of. So going back a few thousand years, it's kind of common knowledge that the people back then believed that the gods controlled the sun and the seasons. So the Celts, to pray for the return of the sun, the Celts would light huge bonfires. As a way to give thanks and give back to the earth for her bounty, they gave sacrifices. These sacrifices included animals. To understand this way of thinking, we need to get rid of our preconceived notion of sacrifice. Sacrifice wasn't a dark, demented practice. What it was a way for them to give back to the earth for what she gave up for them, giving up food for the harvest, animals so that they could eat and have clothing, so that they could have shelter, so that they could live. So to give back to her, to say thank you for giving this to us, thank you for taking care of us, they gave her a sacrifice of an animal. Maybe they gave her food too. Maybe they offered food. But the idea was not a disgusting ritual where they're going to drink blood and dance in the entrails and have a demented, crazy, nasty orgy. It was a Thanksgiving sort of ritual. So that's what sacrifice was. And like I said, we need to change how we view sacrifice. It was a very positive thing. It wasn't negative at all. So this is part 1. Let's go on to part 2.